Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for being here for the second of a series of 3 recruitment webinars this year for the CCST Science and Technology Policy Fellowship. Today's is on what is it like to be a CCST Fellow. My name is Sarah Brady. I'm the Deputy Director of CCST and also a Science Fellow alum. I'd like to open our webinar today by acknowledging that I'm presenting to you in Sacramento, California, from the tribal land of the Nisenan people. Sacramento was a gathering place for many local tribes. We acknowledge the southern Maidu people to the north, the valley and plains Miwok peoples to the south of the American River, and we would also like to honor the Patwin Wintun peoples to the west of the American River. Today, I'll briefly introduce CCST and then open up the floor to hear from the 4 amazing panelists we have. The California Council on Science and Technology is a nonpartisan nonprofit organization established over 30 years ago at the request of the legislature. CCST was created to provide science and technology advice from the wealth of outstanding academic and research institutions in California directly to policymakers. California is very lucky to have such an incredible network of expertise, and our job at CCST is to help amplify and translate the expertise in this network into actionable advice for policymakers. We do this through a number of mechanisms, including expert briefings, workshops, writing peer-reviewed reports, and of course, we run the CCST Science and Technology Policy Fellowship Program, where we place PhD scientists and engineers for a year of government service and leadership training in the executive branch and the legislature. Now, I would like to turn to our panelists for a Q&A session. Today, I have with me 4 alumni who are here to share with you about their experience and what it's like to be a CCST Science Fellow. We will have a lot of time for audience questions, so please use the Q&A feature to submit your questions for the panel. Panelists, I'd love to have each of you introduce yourself and share why CCST Fellowship and what was one thing that surprised you about your day-to-day work during the fellowship. Meron, would you like to kick us off?
Sure, yes. Hi, everybody. My name is Meron. I am, or I was a 2019-2020 CCST Fellow. I was placed in the Senate. I was working for Senate Budget Committee. I did my PhD at Berkeley, where I was studying hydrogen-powered energy conversion devices for transportation. I currently work for the Energy Project at the Bipartisan Policy Center. And to answer the question, Sarah, the reason I chose this fellowship was what was really attractive to me. Well, to be completely honest, part of it was sort of serendipitous and part of it was really wanting something. So I just kind of stumbled on CCST. I noticed that it was a smaller policy fellowship, which I really wanted because I felt like that would help me form strong relationships. And I also knew the area, so I was comfortable with Sacramento. The other aspect that was really attractive to me was seeing other Black fellows that had gone through the program succeed and have stayed in policy, which for me was a good signal that I could do well at CCST. And then one thing that really surprised me about working in my placement or in policy was as an engineer, I was constantly told that engineering is very iterative, but it was really fascinating to learn how policy is very iterative too.
I love that. Thank you, Meron. Christine, would you like to go next?
Yes, thank you, Sarah. And good morning. This feels so different than the last time I did one of these and we were huddled around the conference call hub. So it's very, very high tech of us in 2021. My name is Christine Casey. I was a science fellow in 2015. And I got my PhD in biology from the University of Rochester and came to California for a postdoc at UC San Diego, which is where I heard about the fellowship. I was placed in the Senate Transportation and Housing Committee. And now currently I work with the legislature in the Assembly Transportation Committee. So I've had a few stops in between then, including working at the Department of Finance on the Air Resources Board budget, cap and trade spending, and also got to spend some time working at CCST on staff. So that was a great experience as well to see the fellowship from the other side. The two questions, I am looking over at my notes today to make sure I cover them all. Why did I choose the fellowship? I know this isn't always the best reason to choose something, but sometimes when you're starting to become disillusioned with where you're at, and I know, many scientists are looking for a way to have impact in other areas, and, going through science and doing my postdoc and realizing, I'm going to get off of this academic treadmill and see where I can have some impact, and actually did one of those quizzes of what should your career be on science.com or something, and it said you should do science policy. I said, this is great because California has one of the only and the best science policy fellowships there is. So I'm in the perfect place at the perfect time. Something that surprised me about my day-to-day work schedule as a fellow was just how exciting it was. As soon as I started, I was like, this is what I was missing in academia, sort of the unexpectedness, the things that pop up and the problems that you have to solve, because you have things that you're working on like projects, but then you have things that come up. So if you like having those unanticipated meetings and things that pop up that need your attention, it's definitely great because it always keeps you on your toes. And for me, it was always exciting.
Thank you, Christine. Carlos, would you like to go next?
Hi, good morning. So my name's Carlos. I did my PhD at the University of Michigan in neuroscience, where I studied sleep and synaptic plasticity. And I was a 2021 fellow in the office of Senator Wieckowski, where I remained as a policy analyst, and that's where I'm working right now. So in terms of why I chose CCST specifically, I knew that I wanted to transition to science policy, but I wanted something that was a little bit more structured and had also some, career development resources. And so CCST sort of checked off all those boxes, and it seemed like a great program for somebody who was coming from academia and wanted to sort of get a hands-on experience in the policy realm, but just was in that transitory phase. And so, I chose CCST for that purpose. And also it was in California, and, California has a history of sort of passing legislation at the interface between science and policy, and that really interested me. And so those are the reasons I chose CCST. In terms of, I think the other question was something that surprised me about the fellowship. Is that right? It's not so much that this surprised me, because if you would have asked me, is there going to be interactions with like advocacy groups and is there going to be negotiations? I would have said yes, but it's one thing to say that that's going to happen. It's another thing to experience. So the actual experience, if that makes sense, was surprising. It was really rewarding having to touch base with opposition and support and sort of negotiate and compromise on bills. I would say that was the most surprising experience, but it was also pretty much the most rewarding. And yeah.
Thank you, Carlos. Nicole, would you like to start?
Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole. I was a 2021 fellow, so just finished. So I was a fellow for most of this year and just finished my fellowship at the end of October. And I was placed in the California Strategic Growth Council, which is within the governor's office and the Office of Planning and Research. And I am now still at a staff member at the California Strategic Growth Council. So I stayed right after my fellowship, and I received my PhD in neuroscience from the University of Pennsylvania. And I chose the CCST Fellowship because I knew that I wanted to go into science policy after doing, career exploration, kind of listing out all of the possible jobs outside of academia for a PhD. And after, thinking about like my strengths, my weaknesses, and just the type of work that I would be doing. I also took the AAAS career poll and also got science policy, and just attending different career panels and speaking to, PhD graduates who had joined science policy fellowships, and just the type of projects and the work that they are doing, it just really appealed to me. And so I decided I was going to officially apply to science policy fellowships. And I wanted CCST specifically because I was doing my PhD in Philadelphia, but I was born and raised in California and really wanted a way to come back and establish roots again in California. And so CCST was basically a perfect fellowship for me. And what really surprised me about, I'm sorry, my cat is now bombing my Zoom, but what really surprised me about the fellowship is how open people in the state government are to have people from different backgrounds and different perspectives working on projects, and how, at least in my office, there was people from lots of different backgrounds and training, and also how there's a lot of other fellowship programs that bring people in from different experiences into the state government. And so that was really welcoming for me, knowing that I was welcomed with my, with my training and experience without ever doing policy before that. They really wanted, my skill sets and my outside perspective to really advance a lot of the things that we were working on. So, yeah.
Thank you, Nicole. I think the appearance of a pet is probably the sign of a successful Zoom webinar. So that was perfect. So we're going to start with one more question that we have teed up, and then all the Q&A questions are rolling in here. So panelists, feel free to keep your video on. I'll try to call on one or two of you, but also if I don't, feel free to jump right in and add whatever you'd like to share. So Meron, I thought maybe you were the best to answer this first question. Can you describe a typical workday as a CCST fellow? Intensity, number of hours, days per week, demands, kind of the whole mix of all of that.
Yeah, sure. I can do that. So it really depends, I would say, and sort of like it depends on the legislative schedule. I was on the budget schedule, which it has a different kind of ebb and flow than the regular legislative schedule. So your workflow really kind of tracks with, when the budget is introduced by the governor. So there's a lot of work around that time, and then when there are hearings happening and when it's going to be heard on the floor. So it really ebbs and flows, but you really have sort of this focused time, especially starting in like early in January, which is when the budget is released, and then when it passes in June. So like that time is like kind of focused, and then everything else also comes after that. In terms of like a day-to-day though, I will say it was never as intense as grad school. Yes, you had, a few days where maybe you needed to work on something because you had a hearing the following day or things like that, or you needed to wrap that up. But you can have a pretty balanced life. And then also, especially when you're on this legislative schedule, after session ends, there's a lot of downtime to read and visit sites and all those things.
Thank you. Nicole, would you like to add in anything from an executive branch perspective?
Yeah, definitely. So the executive branch operates a bit differently than the legislature. We're not, our work isn't dependent on the legislative cycle. And so our work is a lot more consistent. And so instead of having, periods of really intense work and then periods of downtime, it's just very consistent 9 to 5 type of work. And so obviously there will be times where, you know, there's busier times versus not busier times, but you're really working consistently. And as it compares to grad school in terms of work-life balance, it was really great just having a desk job, just transitioning to just a desk job and not having to go into the lab and do, you know, physical, you know, experiments and all of those things. And so that was really nice. And definitely they respect your weekends and vacation time, and they on the executive branch. And so really always, we're really respectful of my time. And if I wanted to work after hours or on the weekend, that was always my choice. So.
Thank you. Carlos, would you like to share what qualities make someone successful as a CCST Science Fellow?
I think being conscientious and just, I mean, it's sort of a hackneyed expression, but just being on time and making sure you're doing what you're supposed to be doing is really important. Other than that, being a critical thinker, which I think everybody in CCST Fellowship, you know, already comes equipped with that, is, you know, having done research and being in academia, is knowing how to think critically and ask the right questions, and what sources are the best. You know, I think that's one of the things we learn in graduate school, is knowing what sort of source is going to give us the best information as opposed to other sources which may not be as reliable. So I think a lot of the skills that you pick up in academia make you a great science fellow. Yeah.
Thank you. Do any of the other panelists want to add to that answer at all?
I'll add in just a little bit, because I know there was this question popped up multiple times in the chat box. So people are really curious, you know, like, what do I need to know to be a fellow? And it really does have more to do with the basic framework of learning and analytics that you get in graduate school. You know, being curious, seeking the answers, having a process to understand and ask the right questions. One of the things that I did in grad school and as a postdoc, and many of you probably do as well, is review papers, and you look at, you know, what is the question that the experimenter is trying to solve? Did they choose the right experiment to answer that question? Did the results line up with their conclusion? You can take that very simple module and transfer it into policy. Very similarly, you know, what is the policy question that we're trying to solve? Is there evidence out there? Doing a literature review? What is the policy proposal for how to answer that problem? How are they going to measure the outcomes? So really is a lot of those analytical questioning skills that are, you know, you don't see it, you can't imagine at first, but they're so applicable to the fellowship.
Thank you, Christine. Nicole or Meron, anything to add?
Yeah, just to kind of add with, you know, what you sort of do on the day-to-day, maybe I didn't, I partially addressed that, but really, you know, in the early stages, you're trying to keep up with the news, you're trying to understand what the policy as well as the politics of the question that's relevant to your either member or your committee. So it's really about sort of information management, and I think that's really what we're trained to do on a basic science level, but like learning how to translate that to like the news is something you will learn to do as a fellow, and I think that will be a skill that will be helpful throughout your rest of your career.
There was actually one more thing I wanted to add that I should have added. You know, in addition to just being conscientious and, you know, transferring the analytic framework that you got from graduate school to your fellowship, is being proactive. I mean, there are going to be times, particularly in the Senate, where there are lulls. And there were things I didn't have to do that I chose to do just for either intellectual curiosity or because I thought it would have benefited the senator to do. And I think the reason that I ended up staying in the Senate, in the office that I'm currently in, is because I was proactive and I took the opportunity to do those extra things. So I think that's really important, is just being proactive wherever you end up.
That was the perfect transition, Carlos. Nicole, let's start with you. Can you share how did the fellowship, kind of building on what Carlos shared, how did the fellowship help you with your next career steps and really getting to where you wanted to be after the fellowship?
Yeah, I would say that to what Carlos said is relates a lot to that, just being proactive and being able to take on many different projects and be involved in, different teams, and being able to, have a good handle, your work-life balance, and, managing multiple projects, which is what you do as a scientist. And so I think one person left from my office at the Strategic Growth Council, and they approached me and they were like, well, we want to bring you on. You've been doing great work at SGC, and we think that it would be a great opportunity. And so that's, and they just said that my work was very invaluable to the program. And so really, that's kind of how I came into my role. And so, and I really wanted to continue, my work in my office and continue my skill set that I was learning in my office. And so it was just a great opportunity.
Thank you. Meron or Christine, would you like to add anything about the professional development that you participated in during your fellowship year?
I'll start just because I know one of the positions that I held after the fellowship was working at the Department of Finance. And one of the reasons that I wanted to work there was that during the course of the year, we meet with so many folks, agency secretaries, and so many people that we met in other capacities as well said, oh, I worked on finance, or I worked on budget. And so understanding that in addition to the policy really made me consider, okay, what other skills do I want to collect sort of after this fellowship to help continue growing my knowledge in this space. And I should also say, the fellowship, of course, was instrumental in working at CCST, and never would have worked for CCST if I hadn't been a fellow. Not that you can't, but because I got to see the work that they were doing, and that opportunity arose as well.
Yeah, I'll just add that it really, you get like such a kind of a collection of projects, so you get to go wild and really like test the limits of like, can I do this, can I do that, because you have a little bit of security being a fellow, being new, you have a mentor, so you can actually really, for me, that was the year I spent all my undergrad and grad school studying energy and climate change, but that was the one year I didn't do anything associated with climate change, and I just really kind of went with it. And it was really eye-opening to see how money is spent at the state level. And then we were also in a COVID year, so understanding how federal dollars are spent and allocated and what a state does during an emergency was really eye-opening. So there's a lot of different things that you can't anticipate once you are in that office that will give you an opportunity to learn. And then so each thing will be an opportunity to develop something or grow something you already are good at. I think there's a lot of different things that may come depending on where you're placed.
Thank you. Christine, I want to jump back to you and ask, what were some of the biggest challenges you faced during your fellowship? Maybe this could be tied to skills you needed to develop, but I imagine there might be some other challenges you want to touch on too.
Yeah, I think one of the things working in policy that I still struggle with, having a science background, is that we may have all the scientific data and have a clear idea for how we want things to work. And policy is not black and white. It is, sometimes very gray, and there are other considerations. So it is great to have, the science informing the policy. And it's good that, the science fellows can bring that to the discussion. And then we have to layer in all of the additional factors, the politics, the politics. There's so many different facets of what priorities people consider as they're making their decisions. And so that it's especially at the front of my mind now in my current position, because as I said, that's something I still need to work on. I think one of the other challenges that perhaps it depends on, how your academic career went, but I think, just being more assertive is a good skill to have. It's good to be humble and know and understand what you don't know, but when you do know something, even though you're quote unquote just a fellow, you can still be the expert in a conversation. And if you understand something, you can ask questions, and finding that balance between, during the negotiation process of being respectful, but demonstrating what you know and trying to get your point across is one of those softer skills that develops during the fellowship. And, people have many different personalities, so people approach their jobs in different ways. Some people are I'm just going to be nice and ask questions, but I still think you're wrong. And other people are going to be a little more blunt about it, and, to varying degrees of success. So I think that's something that you can only learn through navigating very carefully through the policy world.
Thank you. Nicole, any challenges you'd like to add from the executive branch perspective?
Yeah, I would say in terms of the nature of the work being placed in the governor's office, which is a very political office, and just being very careful in terms of, what we communicate and the products that we put out, because we are coming directly from his office, as opposed to maybe some of the other agencies that can operate a little bit more independently. But one of the great things about being in the governor's office was being able to work across all of the different agencies a lot of the time. And one of the challenges with that is just being able to integrate, everyone's needs and priorities across agencies into a strategic high policy document that cuts across all aspects of the state. And so that was definitely one challenge. And then a personal challenge for me with the fellowship was just, and I think this touches on some of the other questions that are in the chat right now, is kind of the transitioning between a career in academia and into policy. And as I said, my background was in neuroscience, and my placement was in climate policy and working on climate change, which was a completely new area for me. So that was definitely a steep learning curve for me, and a bit of a challenge, just being comfortable learning and navigating an area that I don't have direct training in. But it's a challenge I accepted. And as I said before, my office was really welcoming of other perspectives. And I used definitely a lot of my general and soft skills as a scientist, as opposed to my direct expertise, and just really enjoy tackling this policy area. And now I'm still here. So it ended up well.
Thank you. Carlos, can you talk a little bit about the first couple weeks when you showed up as a CCST Science Fellow? You're just getting your feet wet. How did that go? How did it feel? What is the good, the bad, and the ugly of those first couple of weeks?
Well, the first couple of weeks was just sort of getting acclimated to the office and to who was going to be working with, and sort of what was expected of me. I'm happy there wasn't anything ugly about the first few weeks for me. I was looking that, I think other people have said this, it will be dependent on where you end up and who you work for, but I'm in a fairly very open office that communicates quite a bit and always wants feedback and wants to mentor you. I mean, I think the mentors that CCST have chosen, they chose them for a reason. So I was very lucky that my mentor has been has been great in terms of making sure that I know what I need to do and how to do it and to make sure that I'm not lost. And the first few weeks is basically just that, just making sure that, you know, I sort of knew what was expected of me and how to get that done. Yeah, you know, it's I think it's a bit different because we started completely virtual, and so I didn't get to work in the office for a few weeks. So some of that may differ, but the first few weeks is basically just getting to know who I was working with and getting to know the basics, and it was all pretty seamless in my experience. I didn't have any issues with it. Yeah. I wish I could share more ugliness. It might be more helpful, but yeah.
I don't have any ugliness, but I want to add on to what Carlos was saying, that I think there's this previous transition period that also helps too, because a lot of the jumping into the pool happens in the safety of the CCST training camp at the beginning. So that was where I felt most overwhelmed, and it was okay because I was surrounded by, you know, at that time we had 10 people in my cohort, surrounded by 10 other people who had varying levels of familiarity with the subject. You know, I was one of those that on the first day, and they asked how many assembly members are there and how many senators are there. And I said, oh my gosh, they are going to kick me out because I have no clue. And so having that training was, I think, the most helpful. And then getting to the office, like Carlos said, everyone is really super excited to get a science fellow. Like, we have a science fellow in the other room as I speak. And as soon as I found out we were getting them, I was like, okay, he's coming to the Tesla tour with us. Like, I want him to see all the cool things that we do, and I want to throw him in there. And really, yeah, everyone's just so excited about having a fellow, and we want them to do well. They want them to do well, us to do well. And speaking on both sides, but so they want success for fellows. And so it's really helpful to easy to integrate into the team.
Thank you. We have a question here in the chat too, noting that social and behavioral sciences are also eligible to apply if you have a PhD for the CCST Science Fellowship program. But they're making the observation that it seems like most of our fellows come from the hard sciences. So in what way does your topical expertise come into play? Does it matter if you're a social scientist or an economist or a biologist? So how do you walk that line of entering the policy world, but also, you know, using or not using the expertise that you bring? Meron, can I go to you for this one?
Yes, I want to just start off by saying we welcome social scientists to join us. Actually, we welcome all kinds of scientists. I think I would love it if CCST grew that way. So if you have some slight hesitation, I'd be happy to connect you with, we do have a few folks that have joined us and they're successful in policy. So, just to kind of affirm you if you're thinking about applying. But then in terms of coming from the hard science and then going into, maybe a not so hard science focused area, that was definitely my experience because I had done, like I said, chemical engineering. I was doing a lot of material science research for my background, and then landed in budget, which I had absolutely no clue about. And then more specifically, the area that I was supporting my mentor on was largely around consumer finance and consumer protection, which again, had no idea about. So really, I think that was the time when I just spent a lot of time reading and catching up and talking to experts, and experts, especially because you're reaching out to them from the Senate, are really willing to talk to you because they know the issue well and they want to, contribute to government. So I've reached out, cold emailed folks to be like, can you explain why this is such an important issue, or why this is such a cause for tension, and why the banks are saying this, but the consumers are saying this. So like someone who's well versed in that consumer law was able to explain a lot of things to me. And those experts also exist within the building, which is what makes this work really fascinating. There are consultants that have worked in those specific issues, so you can reach out to them. So definitely, like, the fact that your background is hard science or not doesn't necessarily affect how you do in the fellows. But I will say, after leaving the fellowship, I've definitely grown in my, I guess I've trained myself a little bit more to understand the social aspects of my work, because we know there's a lot of intersection, and the hard sciences do such a poor job of kind of merging that. So that's an area that I feel like I'm continuing to grow on the daily on. And so you have that advantage coming into policy.
I completely agree. Thank you. Carlos, I'd like to jump over to you for the next question. To what degree was your pursuit of CCST fueled by prior affiliations with the program or other affiliations you had, or direct policy experiences? Or was this just a totally new path for you?
So I didn't have any direct experience with CCST prior to applying, but I did have some sort of policy experience and some experience in outreach that fueled my determination to pursue science policy. I took classes in the science policy program at my university during graduate school that really solidified my desire to pursue science policy, and I did some AAAS programs that solidified it. I knew that going into CCST, I wanted to do science policy, and CCST just seemed to be one of the best ways of doing that. But I don't think, I think there are a lot of academics who also just realize near the end of their career or their graduate school career that they want to do something differently. And I think that's equally as valid, an avenue to take. But for me, I had prior experiences in prior leadership positions that cemented my desire to pursue science policy.
Thank you. I think Christine articulated it really well, that you don't have to know everything about policy. You don't have to have experience. We're really looking for the right type of person that is really passionate to do this work. Nicole, do you want to add anything about prior experiences you had before the fellowship?
Yes, definitely. So I did not have any policy experience prior to the fellowship. And so, but what I did have is just a lot of outside involvements that weren't just being in the lab. I was really involved in graduate student advocacy and leadership organizations, and doing a lot of science communication and outreach in the community that I was doing my PhD in. And so having a lot of those outside experiences and leadership experiences is really, and just being able to work with, to show that you can work with many different types of people, and that you have those strong communication and convening of stakeholder skills are really key. And so showing that you have interests outside of science is really the main trait that we're looking for in the fellowship.
And just to preface what Sarah said, sorry.
Go ahead.
All my experience was either at the state level in Michigan, or having at the national level. And at the national level was like very minimum. It was some workshops and things of that nature. So even though I had policy experience, none of it was specific to California. I came into California as like a newbie. I knew the basics, but I by no means was like a experienced policy person in California. So just to preface that a lot of people come in here knowing very little about California, and by the end of it, they're I like to think somewhat experts. So yeah.
By the end of it, they're working still in the state senator's office, right, Carlos? Thank you. Christine, I'd like to jump over to you next. In what aspects does your approach to your job differ from your colleagues who have a more traditional government or policy background?
That is a good question. And my chief always says that she appreciates my scientific background, and particularly now for the issue area that I am working on. Even though I am a biologist by training, I get to work on air quality programs that intersect with transportation. And so really thinking about what are the emissions levels of vehicles and what are the incentive programs and how are we reducing these, and anything, it's like anything with a graph. It's like, oh, okay, you are the scientist. You can actually dig into these things and understand it. And not that other staffers like don't read charts and data and stuff, but they really, lean on the science fellows to take the science that's out there seriously and to consider it and bring it into the discussions of the policy. Because other times we can tend to just, the legislature has so few staff and agencies have so many, maybe not Strategic Growth Council. I know you guys are small and mighty, but sometimes we just tend to take the research that's coming out from agencies and say like, okay, that's it. But can we, analyze it and make sure that they're making the correct assumptions? Are they doing the right experiments that are giving us this data? And so I think that's where, I'm always going to have that scientific questioning of, what are the methods? Is this a valid conclusion that you've reached that may be different from some of my other colleagues?
Thank you. Meron, I'd like to jump back over to you. If you could share during your fellowship and even now since your fellowship, what was your engagement like with the alumni of the program?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. I will say CCST alumni engagement is like one of the best parts of the program. Alumni are like highly engaged with, at least, since I've been around, highly engaged with the new fellows, really excited to welcome incoming new fellows. And, when they do come, they share with us like their experience. They want us to be friends and stuff. So there's really like not a lot of barriers to like forming relationship. Everyone kind of sees that you're making quite a transition. So people are really open to, helping create like new relationships as well as showing you around and things like that. I'll say that Christine actually was my alumni mentor, still is. We connect sporadically and chat, and there's been multiple like alumni gatherings that have been coordinated. Of course, with COVID, it was slowed down a little bit. But alumni will also expend a lot of extra time, to guide incoming fellows, talk to them about placement office, talk to them about their experience. And alumni currently is actively engaged on like the diversity and equity issues with CCST. It's an active, ongoing conversation that we're having, and they show up to every meeting. We show up to every meeting, and so I will say that like there's a lot of support all the way from like the early cohort to the current.
Thank you. Nicole, can you share, was there a particular previous experience that you think you drew on the most while you were a fellow, or perhaps what made you decide to pursue the fellowship?
Yeah, great question. I think one of the main experiences that I think really drove me to want to do the fellowship, and that I think I use in my experience in the fellowship, was really being a part of a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives at my school, and doing a lot of work to really foster a community with the the BIPOC community at my university and grad students, in making sure that we, making sure that we're advocating to administration on our needs and retention and professional development, and as well as making sure that we are going out into the community as well, and making sure that we are showing up into those spaces where we can to, communicate science, teach in schools, and all of those different things. I was president of the SACNAS chapter at my school, which is the Society for the Advancement of Chicanos, Hispanics, and Native Americans in Science. And so being able to be a leader for our school's chapter and attend and really represent this organization and go to national conferences really helped me in terms of my leadership skills, but also bringing my perspective and my experiences to my placement, and really at the Strategic Growth Council. And what's really trying to happen at a lot of different agencies is really trying to do a better job at integrating equity in all of our programs and policy. And so that's something that's we're actively trying to improve on the state. And so just being able to participate in that process and be a part of that process has been really rewarding.
Thank you. Carlos, as one of our more recent fellows on the panel today, I'd like to ask if you can share a little bit about the placement process. Obviously each of you had a very different placement. So how do you land where you land?
So so you interview with a number of different offices, and you sort of touch base, and a lot of this is just finding an office that fits with your personality and what, in addition to what you ultimately want to end up doing. But a great deal of it is finding an office that fits with your personality, that you're going to thrive in, that you're going to be comfortable in. So, you do the interview process, you look for that, and then ultimately you rank them and they rank you, and CCST does their magic and you end up in an office. And I actually, so in my experience, this office was not my first pick. It was lower on my list, but I'm actually incredibly happy that I ended up in this office, because it sort of was the perfect fit for me, in terms of mentorship and in terms of how open everybody in the office is about communicating and feedback and the sort of policy goals they have in mind. And that's a part of it, is just having trust in the process, that CCST, has a history of doing this. They know what they're doing, and that as long as you go into these interviews knowing what you want and looking for a fit, and you rank your list accordingly, that you'll end up somewhere that will be good for you. So that's a big part of it, is having trust in the process.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to? Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. So you obviously you do sort of a boot camp training, and then you do all these interviews that Carlos mentioned, and you could be placed, you do your selection and things like that. And sometimes you're placed in your top choice. Sometimes you're placed not so much in your top choice, but really, I think, honestly, we are, like, as PhDs, we definitely are used to, being critical on ourselves, or as scientists, being self-critical is like very common. But I really think trusting yourself to, do well. I think anywhere you are placed, you will thrive, because we are people who are capable of learning and beyond, our expectations. And I think that's really what I tried to take away. I certainly didn't get, my top choice, but that doesn't mean that your experience is going to be bad. Everyone I've talked to, like, who didn't get their top choice also had a great experience. It's 1 year, you get to kind of explore, you have a little bit of safety, and, just trust yourself that you will kind of learn, you will learn to articulate what you need and get what even if it's not topic area, that you'll get a lot of transferable skills that will take you to the next place successfully.
Nicole or Christine, did you want to add anything about the placement process? I know we usually have a lot of questions about that.
As Carlos said, oh, sorry, Nicole, I just saw you on mute too. It is sort of magic that happens. And I have been fortunate enough to see on the receiving end of being placed as a fellow and then also helping to determine where they go. It's very thoughtful about, where CCST thinks that fellows will succeed based on conversations with the fellows and with the host offices and knowing the history of, mentorship in the host offices. And it, like everyone said, you may not get your top choice, but CCST is usually looking out and has your back to make sure that, they don't want anyone to have a bad year, obviously.
Yeah, I was just going to add really similar things to that, because we are a smaller program, CCST really make sure that they get to know us and have lots of conversations about what we're looking for in a placement and our skill set and strengths and weaknesses. And so they're hearing, all of that from us. And so even though we think that, one office is our top choice, but actually what we're saying is something different from what we want. And so I think a lot of my experience, and then also with other fellows, is that we actually appreciated this placement more, especially for me. I was able to grow a lot more than in my office and realize that it was the best choice for me.
And just the ranking process is also, you do get the chance to put your input, right? Like you can explain your rationale for why you ranked the way you ranked it and why you sort of want to work in these offices and why you don't want to work in these other offices. So there is quite a bit of input from you that gets ultimately taken into account for your very placement. So.
All right, I'm going to try to squeeze in 2 more questions. Maybe I should only do 1, but we're going to go for 2. So first, just the briefest of answer. Can you give 1 example of how you were involved in the policymaking process? So what is a deliverable that you worked on where you felt like your scientific expertise was leveraged or your skill set from grad school was leveraged? So if possible, in 1 sentence. Christine. Or someone else.
No, I'm glad we have 4 different folks here because everyone's perspective will be different. But as a committee consultant fellow, I really got to shape every bill that came through the committee that I worked on, whether just looking at data for a problem that they were trying to solve, or transportation funding and road conditions and research funding. And that's my 3 sentences. Sorry.
Meron, how about you next?
Yeah, I was really one of my main and big projects when I was at the Senate budget was helping helping transition the Department of Business. DBO is the short name, which used to be the California Finance Protection Bureau. So basically transitioning that from a sort of business organization to a consumer protection organization, which required a lot of policy making. It required a lot of hands. So I will say that I was really instrumental in shaping that and making sure that consumer protection was at the heart of it.
Thank you. Nicole, what is your 1 deliverable?
I was a part of the leadership team and worked on and actively working on the California's climate adaptation strategy.
Not a small task. Thank you. Carlos, how about you?
So this would be a runoff sentence, but I staffed 2 bills with technology and science, aspects that I'm really proud of. They're 2-year bills, so I'm still working on them, but it's been a huge learning experience, and that I would say that's my deliverable, that they're still alive, and that one of them is in the other house. And then, now that I'm staying in the office, I've put forward a few bill ideas that might be taken up. So that's been super exciting.
Thank you. All right, our last question for today. Meron, I'm going to start with you. What is just one final word of advice that you would want to share with the prospective applicants we have listening today?
I guess I would just say, like, why not you? I certainly didn't see policy in my future, so come just like explore for a year, try something new. You might be surprised what you find.
Thank you. Christine.
Final piece of advice is be nice to everyone. You never know who you're arguing with today. You may need their help tomorrow.
Good one. Carlos.
Be kind, work hard, and shoot your shot. Is that a phrase? Shoot your shot. Yeah.
Thank you, Nicole.
I would say just be open and embrace change. And if you do want to be in policy, go for it. It's possible. And, it might be challenging, it may be uncomfortable at times, but the work-life balance, the environment is really rewarding. So go for it.
Thank you. You guys are efficient. That was perfect. I had a lot of fun hearing all of your answers today and chatting with all of you. Thank you to everyone in the audience who joined us today. I hope this was really useful. Panelists, if you're open to it, feel free to share your contact information in the chat. Otherwise, anyone in the audience, always feel free to reach out to CCST, myself, or Paneet Bular if you have other questions that we can help with. So applications opened on December 1st for next year's cohort, and they'll close on March 1st. So keep that in mind. If you'd like to watch this webinar again or know someone who is interested but couldn't make it, it will be posted on our website. And please join us for the 3rd webinar of this series that will be on January 20th, 2022, where we'll discuss navigating the CCST Fellowship application and interview process. Thank you for all your excellent questions, and panelists, thank you again so much for your time today. Have a great day.